You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans. I'm Alex,
And I'm Connor.
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars. Particularly, this will be primarily Connor's episode, but welcome to episode 77, fan editing in Star Wars. And George Lucas is the first fan editor, and whatever other topics that Connor would like to bring up in the world of fan editing. Which,
Yes,
Connor, why don't you go ahead and define that for our audience, for those like me who are unaware of the practice?
for sure. So a fan edit is a version of a film, television show. I've even seen it done with comic books, where a fan, not the original creator, has gone back and uh, edited it in some way, to be simple, cutting out footage, adding different footage. This could be an audio process where it's music being added. This could be popular in taking deleted scenes and reinstating them back into a film, or doing something wild and having an end product that is totally separate and different than the intentions of what was like originally released. But I've in my free time grown to fan edit. I have my own version of Kenobi, taking the series and honing that into a single film as I think it was originally intended. Um, but it's a little niche community where uh, many people have gotten into this habit of fan editing, and I think it really got its start with Star Wars, just because George Lucas himself, as you've kind of previewed, fan edited his own films. Now he's not necessarily
Many times.
so yeah, even after George sold Star Wars to Disney, we still have his edits um, updating on Disney Plus. It's strange, McClunky for those of you out there who are fans of the most recent cut. Um, but in the '90s, George Lucas decided, hey, we're going to re-release the trilogy ahead of the prequels. And we're not just going to show the original versions, we're going to add special effects that he, quote unquote, intended to include the whole time. So, a couple instances, we have a new scene where Han Solo speaks directly to Jabba the Hutt before leaving the Tatooine with Luke and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it's a sort of a version of the conversation that plays out between Greedo and Han in an earlier scene, but we get to see this direct confrontation between the two. The original footage just showed an average guy as Jabba the Hutt, but in the new footage, we have a CGI creature. So that's a case where, okay, we can understand uh, George is going back and hoping to uh, improve his vision. Sometimes I don't know if his vision needs improving. Uh, CGI will always look like CGI, and practical effects will always look like practical effects. And adding so much early CGI to a film that is a film series that is renowned for its practical effects is visually jarring, especially. And I'll conclude my assessment of George's work here. Uh, when you add a pop dance routine with direct POV on the performers into Return of the Jedi, that is a little bit distracting when it comes to visual consistency, tone, um, narrative necessity. It's just a little jarring. So fans have started trying to get the best versions of those original trilogy cuts.
Yeah, so generally looking at George Lucas as a fan editor, I think he is unable to resist the allure of tinkering with his own work using tools he did not have back in the 70s and 80s. So I
Mhm.
think that was the impetus for which he used to change up his work. But then George also picked up some moral views that he wanted to make sure, like, oh, Han Solo would be a murderer if he shot Greedo first. So we need to make sure that he's not morally culpable for killing Greedo, when in fact that was the whole point of your scene, George.
Right.
Um, is that Han Solo has some growth to do. But George Lucas, in the 10 years between the special editions and the original, picked up some ideas about morally that he couldn't get over having his own hero now making that decision, so he rewrote it. Personally, I don't agree with that view on it. I
Mhm.
know, and him doing it is different than a fan editor doing it because him doing it, he's trying to almost erase his original. In my
Right.
view, someone who's doing a fan edit is trying to recast something deliberately, knowingly. It's like I know you have the original. Look at mine in contrast, where Lucas is saying, "Forget what I used to do. That never happened. This is now the only true version, and I don't want you to talk about how it used to look, even if you thought it was better, because it belongs to me."
And the sticking point here that makes some people, myself included, unhappy is that he will make previous versions of his work unavailable. So there is no legal way to watch the original cuts of the Star Wars trilogy. Now, look at Steven Spielberg. He did the same thing with E.T. He added digital effects, but when you have your subsequent releases, he allows the fans to decide which ones to watch by including both.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
sorry,
George
was it
has much
Ridley?
more of a. I'm sorry, what was that?
Is it Ridley Scott who did Blade Runner?
Yes, Ridley Scott. Yeah,
Yeah, and then you get a new version of Blade Runner. It's like here's all five of my editions. Watch whichever
hmm
ones you want.
yeah. Because certain people when they grew up with a version. They grew up with Blade Runner with a cheesy narration, and they can't see it any other way. Um, that is very much the case for Star Wars as well. So, just to name a couple popular ones, we have the fan editor Harmy, who has made the despecialized editions, and he has done a meticulous amount of work using the Blu-rays of the original trilogy as a basis. He's gone through every other old version of the original trilogy that wasn't edited. Um, so he's pulling uh, assets, as he calls them, from uh, like the last DVD set. Star Wars was released in its original version as a DVD special feature in a very highly compressed, not attractive looking release. Before that, you have VHS tapes, and you even have laser discs for those of you of a certain generation. I was of the generation of laser discs, and I didn't even know what they were until years after their invention. But imagine a CD or a DVD the size of a vinyl record. That is a laser disc.
It holds about 80-ish minutes of,
Mhm.
or what, 40 to 60 minutes of audio and video if you're lucky on each
Yeah,
side.
and you have to flip halfway in between. Yeah, try not to scratch one of those. But he's even gone through and used old film footage, actual the from the film reel that the movie was sourced from, and he's gone through so many different processes in order to upscale and um, bring less than HD quality footage to HD quality footage. So he's who I started out with as far as there's a better way. There's a way to kind of get to these original versions that I certainly remember watching from my old black VHS tape collection. Um, since then, though, we've had one development that's pretty interesting where someone has found a complete version of the 35 millimeter roll of Star Wars. So they're able to take that, upscale it to 4K. And so we have a series of releases called 4K 77, 4K 80, and 4K 83, which are the original releases of A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So much less tinkering has been done because it's really just taking the original stock film and cleaning that and bringing it up to 4K. But that's the wonders of technology nowadays, and we're able to uh, uh, enjoy Star Wars. So,
Yeah. And so it's interesting to look at this. That's all about the original trilogy, which was
mhm.
released 77 through 83. We don't have as much of that present, at least from Lucas's perspective, in any of the subsequent media. We're not seeing Lucas release like other than sometimes you get a show release on streaming like The Mandalorian. It's like, oh, we forgot to cut out the like in Game of Thrones, we forgot to cut out the Starbucks cup in that scene, so we CGI it out later. That's different than like, oh, we're changing if Han Solo was shooting first.
Yeah, there's nothing
Or
structurally changing in the prequels or really anything other than the original trilogy.
So instead, this leaves us in the sort of era of fans actually editing it because there's now so much Star Wars content. You have people already talking about doing fan edits of Andor to make it lead
Mhm.
right from Andor into Rogue One. You have people doing supercuts of the Siege of Mandalore arc from the Clone Wars to place it all chronologically with the actual events of Revenge of the Sith. You have all of those items. What are your thoughts on those, Connor? And what are some projects that you've seen that are either interesting or questionable?
Sure. So I think that Star Wars is one of the most popular subjects to fan edit, just because as a piece of media, Star Wars is popular. And as we've said before, no one hates Star Wars like a Star Wars fan, and each of us has like an ideal vision of what should have happened. So I've seen some radical edits and heard of some radical edits. Even Topher Grace, star of that '70s show, has his own Star Wars prequel fan edit. He and many others have gone and taken all three films in the prequel trilogy and made a single film, which I think is kind of a mistake, and it breaks convention with the rest of the series. I think Anakin's story is too expansive to whittle down into one film narrative. Uh,
Yeah, and you can't cut out his love story with Padme, however you think of it,
mhm.
without removing his character motivation to turn to the dark side.
But we can, coin a phrase from some behind the scenes footage from George Lucas. We can minimize the effects of it. So, my go-to set to watch is from a fan editor by the name of Hell 9000, and he is one of the few who have gone through and edited all nine Star Wars films in the Skywalker trilogy of trilogies. What he's done is like starting, I guess, with the original trilogy. He doesn't go for just the classic uh, renditions because there are some positives to what George Lucas has done. Updating special effects being one of them. Um, Special effects, certain things where, uh, like having the young Force ghost of Anakin remain makes sense in a modern day context because we later see in Ahsoka, hey, Anakin's Force ghost does look like Hayden Christensen. It doesn't look like 50-year-old Sebastian Shaw. Um, so some of these choices are retained, but just not anything that breaks the structure of the original narrative. So there's no Han Solo shooting first. There's no additional Jabba scene. There's no Jabba's palace dance scene. It's a balanced version. Other people have done this one by the name of Adiwan, who I believe is still like he is one of the OGs of fan editing, but I think he's still working on his Return of the Jedi a decade and a half after starting the trilogy. That's another reason I go with Hell 9000. He's already got his wrapped up. But then you see what he's done with the prequel trilogy. And again, you can't be so extreme in cutting out some elements, but he works around the I hate sand lines. He works around uh, Anakin's expression of despair, murderous rage, and hatred, and still having Padme not be freaked out by that. It makes their relationship a little bit more natural. We have the inclusion of some deleted scenes where in Attack of the Clones we have Anakin meet Padme's parents and have a sort of a lovely view into that dynamic. In return, or in Revenge of the Sith, we have scenes where Padme has political discussions with young Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, sort of setting up the political landscape that's about to be established.
Yeah, and I
So,
I think this brings up just a point maybe for some of our younger listeners, is that we talked about when Star Wars first came out. Until Laserdiscs were a thing, you didn't have home releases of movies. You had to go to the theater until the mid to late '80s to watch a film if you were not wealthy. Uh, but then Netflix didn't start streaming as like the dominant force in the market until what was it like 2010?
Yeah, or late 2000s, early 2010s. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was this period where you got DVDs, and on those DVDs, they would have things called deleted scenes.
Mhm.
These are not present in streaming releases. So they
Sure.
are sort of a very particular point of an era. I remember getting the DVD of The Phantom Menace and watching all the deleted scenes, which were they were included as bonus content to get people to buy the DVD. And so you'd have partially finished or even completely finished scenes that had just been cut for pacing reasons or not included, and they would be included on the DVD release. And so the fan editors will use those scenes. But I just wanted to explain to some of our listeners what they were. Is you
Sure.
would have these extra scenes on DVD release, and so some modern versions people might think of as you have sometimes, oh, like Zack Snyder released the director's cut of Justice League or the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven. That
Mhm.
is taking some of those their deleted scenes they had themselves and releasing it again. But there's also this phenomenon even of budget movies or mainstream movies of just throw the deleted scenes on the DVD to sell copies. Um,
As physical
so
media shrinks, that becomes more and more rare.
yeah, now you have media that can even be edited as per the aforementioned coffee cup live in the database it lives in, and no one ever can see the version with the coffee cup ever again.
Mhm. Right? It gets wiped from existence. So it's fan editing is as much preservation in a way as it is invention. So uh, we have fan edits that take the Revenge of the Sith and to combine that with the sort of closing of the Clone Wars, where we have the Siege of Mandalore with Maul and Ahsoka being spliced together with what's happening with the fall of Anakin. So I think that's interesting. I think it's cool from an experimental standpoint, but I've already complained about, it being visually distracting when you go from something that's practical to something that is entirely digital. So I prefer the fan edits that try to coerce the story into something that's more satisfying. Uh, Hal's versions of the sequel trilogy do this fantastically. They set up Rey's lineage from Force Awakens through some clever edits. They bring uh, the uh, Force spirits of multiple Jedi to the forefront at the end of the final film, The Rise of Skywalker. So it's uh, an interesting way to take that thought of wouldn't it be interesting if, and to see actually someone uh, accomplish that. And it kind of goes back to the conversation of who really owns Star Wars. Can George Lucas go and make edits as he pleases of what he's created? And I think with something that is as popular and important to so many people as Star Wars is, no, he cannot. He may have given birth to Star Wars, but Star Wars has grown up, and everyone has a ideal version of Star Wars. That's not to say that everyone's fan edit is going to be equally fantastic, but I think that um, it's a interesting culture, interesting community where there's no money tied up in it. It's just artistry and people sharing media, sharing opinions, and still getting rather upset um, as much as they would at regular canon media when certain things are changed or not changed. So, just other ones that come to mind are a heavy metal Star Wars, which takes heavy metal music and adds that as a soundtrack, or uh, a version of Star Wars that looks like an old silent film with film grain scratches and an old timey score, or just the original score, instrumental versions. So, uh, whether you are seeking out something that's subtle as far as it changes go, or something that's more bold. I think Star Wars is a very viable, popular uh, canvas for that, and it can provide I don't know, new experiences to pieces of media that are very familiar to all of us. So, any final responses to fan edits in general, Alex?
No, just that it's an interesting area to learn that exists. Seeing these different eras of media all trying to vie in the same area, from the lack of a home release to the DVD era, and now to the era of streaming, where It's possible to more easily maintain a true version, but then also wipe out previous versions with the click of a mouse.
Mhm.
So interested to see how this interacts with media preservation and also how it encourages creativity. It's truly, in my mind, and in the same place as kind of like fan fiction or people playing a Star Wars character in an RPG game where it's
Mhm.
engaging in the world of Star Wars in a creative way while trying to uh, grapple with the giant flawed monolith that is the Star Wars mega franchise.
Yeah, there will never be a single definitive version because, while I grew up with those uh, black VHS tapes, I think you did as well. We have, younger fans who grew up with the special editions who are going to prefer the special editions. So it's, uh, I think, also a means of just saying that, you know, Star Wars is Star Wars. My Star Wars might not be your Star Wars, but in the end, it is still Star Wars.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to our episode on fan editing and Star Wars. Please let us know what you think on our Reddit at reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars, or post a like, a share on whatever podcast platform or video you see this episode on.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.